Dave Kasten. I live in Washington, D.C. I am a recovering government contractor and management consultant. It has been 0 days since my last slide. And I work for Palisade Research, although I'm here in personal capacity in case we talk about anything that is more political in nature. This is a talk that is a partial repeat of the talk I did at Less Online. So if you saw that talk at Less Online, roughly the first half of this is going to be the same. It is going to be somewhat abbreviated in order to be able to cover all the stuff that has happened in the past like 24 hours or less in Washington, D.C. with regards to Anthropic, which I think is going to be really fun to talk about. But if you, for example, if you saw my talk at Less Online and then talked to me about it last night around the fire pit, like no shame if you want to go to a different talk. I think there's relatively little incremental value for like the couple of people who might be in that circumstance. But I don't think I see anyone for whom that's true. Other than Sam, who's a nerd about this like me, so it's fair. All right, so the original title of this talk when I did Less Online was this. I've revised my slides in response to current events. I also wanted to call out a friend who couldn't be here today who really helped me with formatting my slides. They were really great. They really stood by me. They couldn't be here today unexpectedly due to some things that have happened, but I'm hoping that they'll be able to make it. So out of curiosity, I want to know why people came to this talk. So first, you were really weirdly interested in the specific facts of what happened in the Anthropic and Department of War fight. Okay, those of you who are should go to Sam's talk at 6 p.m. today here in Cantor. It's here, right?
It just got moved to 7 in Rat Park.
It just got moved to 7 in Rat Park. Ignore the slides. This is fast breaking news, ladies and gentlemen. That'll be great. Sam was someone who was extremely well informed as all of that stuff was going down, was one of my sources for legal sort of perspectives on that, who's really great. He's also just very well sourced in DC. He'll have a bunch of good stuff to do. Second, the rant. How messed up national security law specifically is, especially since 5:21 p.m. yesterday. Okay, great. And then story time with Dave about national security.
Story time with Dave.
Okay, so we're going to do 2 and 3. I didn't really care if anyone wanted to do 1, but I wanted to check and advertise Sam's thing. So this is the roadmap of the talk. We're going to talk about the Anthropic Department of War thing that happened as a bit of a reminder of where we started. We're then going to talk about how AI and NatSec communities talk past each other, which will springboard into talking about what's happened in the past 24 hours with Anthropic and the export control stuff that has happened. I'll then give you some predictions for the next few years. Epistemically, I'll let you know that all these predictions were written down prior to the past 24 hours, except for one line that I will call out. And then we'll do questions. Great. So, February was weird. Anthropic and the Department of War had a very public and very strange breakup, right? This doesn't normally happen for those of you who don't know DC. Like, normally when there's a disagreement with a defense contractor, what normally happens is that a bunch of very boring people who are bureaucrats, like, write strongly worded, like, letters and memos and eventually lawsuits. And, like, years later, you maybe hear about it if, like, it turns out that someone embezzled. Like, but otherwise, it's, like, below the threshold of anyone paying attention. That was not the case with the Anthropic and the Department of War. There were many things that happened. Zvi Mowshowitz wrote over 100,000 words about it. You can read them if you want to, but probably you should only read the last 30,000 or so, because a lot of things kept on changing over time. So, you want to know what's going on. It turns out that I'm the kind of person that actually is like weirdly a good fit for talking about this. First off, national security law is definitely my special interest, even though I never went to law school. I just think it's really funny, the concept of trying to get a bunch of people who refuse to tell you their last names to obey the US law. This is not exactly an easy thing to do. It is definitely a doable thing to do. America does it better than almost all other countries, contrary to popular opinion. But if, hopefully one of the goals of this talk that will be achieved is causing you to see some of this as zany as I do sometimes. I come to that perspective in part through being a government contractor and management consultant in my 20s and my 30s. I've been there, I've done that, I've gotten the brain damage of having to deal with all of the crazy bureaucracy in that space. I sort of understand AI, but please, dear God, do not make me like whiteboard anything or code anything right now. I will have an aneurysm. And most importantly, it turns out that in the period of like right when Anthropic and the Department of War were fighting, relatively few people who meet criteria 1 through 3 were willing to tweet about this at all because they were like worried about pissing people off. I ill-advisedly chose to tweet a lot about it. And as a result, led to a lot of people talking to me about various things, both privately and publicly, and trying to sort of understand what was going on and why the hell it was that the Secretary of War was picking a fight with a company for being too woke. And then why OpenAI was trying to sort of white knight its way into there. There are a lot of other really great people. I really think that some of them are named here. Sam's also great as well. And Anthropic had some really great lawyers and policy people advising them as well, which I think don't get nearly enough credit, and I think they should get their flowers. So I was, not a fan of what the Department of War was doing in this situation. In fact, Zvi Mauschwitz described me as the least polite person in this conversation, which I consider to be a little bit of a badge of honor. But the whole thing was extremely fucked, right? Anthropic was like, hey, here's two things that are basically illegal. We don't want our model to be able to do them. Department of War. Well, but we want it to be used for all lawful purposes. Anthropic, right? And those aren't legal. We shouldn't do them. Anthropic, and then afterwards, Department of War. Well, but what if they kind of were, and we got a memo that said they were? That'd be okay, right? This was a total strange experience to have. Anthropic was very clearly doing something that's unusual for the defense contractor space, but not unheard of, contrary to what some people were saying. Department of War was definitely trying to pull a fast one, right? This was extremely clear to anyone who understands national security contracting, understands what's regular there. It just was very obvious. And so I got involved on Twitter, which led to an undersecretary of war to block me, which it turns out is probably unconstitutional if it's their official government account. So that was fun, but it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We became friends again, so that's good. I need to tweet at him and ask him out to coffee or something. And here's the thing that's funny and that is sort of moving us towards our current moment, right? The whole time that Anthropic was negotiating with the Department of War, they were having a hole card that they weren't showing, which was that they knew that they had Claude Mythos, and they knew it was a really good model, sir. And they knew that they were going to be needed sooner rather than later. I don't exactly know why they didn't just tell people this at the moment. If you're Anthropic and you kind of know that they're going to change their opinion on you really soon, don't you want to just tell them? But I get it. We've all been through a bad breakup. And so, now we're in a situation where when I talk to offices in DC, a month before sort of Claude Mythos hit, people didn't necessarily know who Anthropic was, nor did the public. During the whole Anthropic Department of War thing, there were senators who were publicly tweeting that they had canceled their OpenAI accounts and posting that they had signed up for Claude. Literally. And people literally will just be like, Claude's the good one, right? And I'm like, ooh, that's a complicated question. But it is certainly the case that Claude became much more known to DC. There just isn't a story where, in a month, the US government goes from picking a fight with a contractor and trying to kick them out in every way possible to being like, all is forgiven. Why don't you install your software on the NSA's most sensitive servers, like yesterday, if you would, please? That's not normally how this goes. So people in DC are like, maybe these AI people are important now? I don't really understand why, but I should maybe pay some attention. There was a lot of problems here. The national security world doesn't really get AI. I can't tell you the number of times I've been told a version of this quote, so I feel comfortable posting it up here because it's kind of a pastiche of something people say all the time, which is I don't understand. The tech industry invades my privacy in order to show me ads to sell me detergent. Why won't they defend the nation? And it's my brother in national security, you run a worldwide surveillance apparatus that spies on them among other people. Maybe chill out a little bit. Maybe recognize that they have interests too, and also that a lot of them are not Americans. This is not something that the national security community is capable of understanding very easily or very well. They, in general, tend to think that this whole interaction is one where sort of the private sector should just do what they say. In fact, they have a term for it. They call you industry. That's a derogatory term, by the way, for those of you who don't know DC. Yeah, you make the mistake of being industry. If you were really good, you would have been government, civil servants, or uniformed military folks. That isn't true of everyone. There's plenty of people like them, but there is definitely some people who hold industry in contempt. And so national security world is very much mad about all of this. OpenAI didn't play their cards very well. Sorry to the OpenAI folks in the room. So as a reminder, Anthropic gets kicked out. OpenAI immediately tries to kind of jump in and be like, "We'll give you the AIs, Mr. President." And this didn't go the greatest in a bunch of ways because they were moving very, very quickly. They didn't understand a lot of things. At one point, their head of national security partnerships, Katrina Mulligan, tried to tell me that on Twitter that NSA isn't part of the Department of War. The head of NSA is a general. It's part of the Department of War. These are basic facts. They didn't understand that all lawful purposes, which is the thing that they agreed to sign up for, is an incredibly broad term, and that every lawyer that's ever touched national security stuff was freaking out at them. They didn't understand, and frankly, maybe Anthropic didn't entirely understand, that the carve out of oh, well, domestic mass surveillance isn't a lawful purpose doesn't actually mean anything because domestic mass surveillance isn't a term in US law. And they didn't really bother to do their research about how any of this works. Basically everything that they signed up for was immediately overturnable by one lawyer writing a memo saying, we've decided that this is all okay. All of the protections we gave OpenAI could have been very easily been just kind of overturned. They didn't understand that. Anthropic, I think, overall picked a bad fight pretty well. They're very, very good at hinting in public to declassified documents, which is a thing, by the way, that national security people do. If you're ever in a conversation with someone who's worked in the government and you say to them hey, what are we doing about Russia? And then they kind of pause, and then they kind of pause, and they kind of look up in this corner of their vision, and they're like, I'm familiar with Washington Post reports that apparently the United States considers Russia an enemy and is giving Ukraine a bunch of missiles. That's their way of hinting at you what's going on without getting in trouble, right? Anthropic is very good at this. Joshua Batson works there. I knew him a very, very little bit in college. Is very, very good at pointing at, hey, there's this declassified document. You should go look at it. Declassified means it's not a crime if I tell you to go look at it. You should go look at it. They played their cards very, very well. But remember that whole thing about why are you guys disloyal and why aren't you just using your powers to help us? That was foreseeable that they were going to fall into this problem too. Some would argue they've fallen into that problem again now with this whole new export control thing that we'll talk about in a second. I don't think that's quite fair, but certainly it's the case that they should have figured out that national security has decided that you are the people spying on them to sell detergent, and so they are expecting you to do everything else they want as well. So the past 24 hours, yeah? Right? There's a particular Anthropic employee that's walking around this conference handing out cards saying, I can't really talk about my day, which, as a DC resident, this is cultural appropriation. That's my job to be vague and mysterious. But I think it is, one, reveals how similar Anthropic's culture sometimes is to the NatSec world, and two, also reveals something about how weird their days are going. So what happened, right? As a reminder of what happened, at 5:21 p.m. yesterday, the U.S. government notified Anthropic that they were using their export control authorities to suspend all access to Fable 5 and Mythos 5 by any foreign national who, whether they live inside the United States or outside the United States, crucially, including foreign national Anthropic employees. And the net effect of this was, it turns out that Anthropic doesn't have a big red button they can push that says just magically instantaneously find out where every single person on Earth is and whether or not they're a US citizen or not, and only give them Fable if they are. Even Mythos isn't that good yet. And so they had to just turn it off until they could figure out what to do next, right? They claim on their end that what happened was that they were told that there was some jailbreak against their model, that it was a partial jailbreak, that they didn't think was that significant, that gave capabilities that they didn't think was that significant, but that the US government is really freaked out by it. And so that's why the order was given. It's really important to note that this is kind of how export control authorities work if you invoke them, right? Export control is designed to deal with physical objects like laptops or cameras or routers or jet engines or whatever, right? It's not designed to deal with software. Sam just walked in front of the camera. It's fine. We'll use Claude Mythos 7 to erase Sam from the footage. They're designed to deal with physical objects. They're not especially designed to deal with knowledge or software. So there was a thing that happened in the 2010s where the Obama administration, which I think many people in the room here think of as the good guys. Not all, but like many folks have good feelings about them. They had this thing where they were trying to block the sharing of cybersecurity intrusion software, which they thought was being used. They were trying to basically stop like people like NSO Group from like hacking like random Mexican civil rights activists and journalists. But the way they wrote the law was basically like a guy who works for like Microsoft that is like from the US can't tell their colleague that works in like, Canada, hey, here's the new virus signature, go block that. It was extraordinarily blunt imposition of these rules. And so industry freaked out in the 2010s, and there's a whole fight about it that everyone's forgotten by now. But like, the lesson I thought we had learned was don't use export control against software unless it's a real emergency or unless it's a very narrow specialized area of stuff like cryptography. Apparently we didn't learn that lesson. So was this a mistake, or was this them trying to fight Anthropic? How about both? My reaction a minute later was basically like, this is just like a very messed up situation. Remember when we had the Anthropic Department of War thing? There were like all these tweets, all these people freaking out. There was all this stuff going on. And like, there was like, a multi-day lead up with like news stories and tweets by the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering that I had to like, look at past his block. There was like, the president was putting out statements. It was like weird, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. Yesterday, there was like a tweet from Anthropic and not much else. And like, I know like it's DC, right? Like we try to get out of work on Fridays, but like, come on, man. Like, it's only 5:21, right? Like, do a tweet on the way to happy hour. So my best guess when this started was that there was about like 30% odds that this was like a total mess up, about 20% odds that this is some combo of a just like screw up plus someone weaponizing a screw up, and then like 40 of the remaining 50, like 49% was they really had it out for Anthropic, and then like 1% odds of like, oh my God, it turns out that if you jailbreak Mythos, it can like just hack like everything at the NSA, right? And I think those odds are roughly still where I'm at. I'm probably leaning even more towards mistake theory now. But it seems like this was not like something where it's a well-intended, well-planned-out rollout of trying to screw over Anthropic if they were trying to screw over Anthropic. So my guess is probably not. We should all monitor the situation. This was the only tweet that I could find yesterday from anyone in government about this. The DOW CIO, said, and by the way, this is an amazing tweet, right? We fully support the president, who had said nothing about it, and Secretary of War, who had said nothing about it, in prioritizing national security and the security of our warfighters, defense industrial base partners, that is to say contractors like Anthropic that they had just kicked out, critical infrastructure, international partners who no longer had access to Fable or Mythos, and allies who no longer had access to Fable or Mythos. Some things are simply more important than revenue cycles, clickbait, and pre-IPO evaluation. America first, always, American flag emoji. This is among the strangest tweets I've ever seen. I don't know if this person was just like trying to like get out ahead of their boss, or thought that everyone was on board, or like everyone else was told to hold off on their tweets and they didn't get the message. Like, I don't really know what's going on here, but like this is not normally, they didn't say anything last time around. I don't know what's like going on. Then the next day, David Sachs, who's like the advisor to the president on the AI stuff, like gave this tweet, and like it's like weirdly conciliatory, right? In this way where like you're kind of like, did they get yelled at overnight? Like what's going on here, right? It ends with like, the admin's hope is now that Anthropic remediates the safety issue. The export control is lifted and Fable goes back into general release. The admin wants to solve that as soon as possible. It is frankly bewildered that Anthropic hasn't wanted to comply with safety requests that it previously said were its highest priority. And it's like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, there's no public thing of the export control. This guy who normally fights Anthropic is like fighting at the beginning and like, being sneering. And then at the end, he's like, but I want to be friends again, which they haven't said before. And like nobody else is not saying anything. This is an extremely odd situation that is like pretty messed up. So what do I feel about all this? I feel pretty confused, but I think it's probably just a horrific game of telephone that got amplified somewhere along the way. And when someone decided to grab a really big hammer, they decided to grab it and like smash really, really hard. But based on what I know right now, this doesn't seem like a fair reaction, right? Like it doesn't seem like we would say like, oh, like if there's a partial jailbreak for a model that gives you capabilities, as Anthropic has claimed, equal to GPT 5.5, that this is like something that's worth pushing the big red button for and basically scaring anyone that ever does a contract with an American tech company again. This just doesn't make any sense to me. Export control is a really blunt instrument, and it's also one that like damages a lot of loyalty, right? It's intended to be invoked this quickly only in like a true emergency, which this doesn't seem to be. And the way that we invoked it, we basically said everyone that certainly at least isn't a, it's a little unclear if green card holders are included in this or not. Like lawyers are still trying to figure this out, last I checked with them. But like certainly everyone who's just like a non-US citizen who works in Anthropic has basically been told that they suck, right? And like, you know, I don't know, but like an Australian citizen that like, or a UK citizen that like works at Anthropic and like doesn't have a green card yet doesn't seem to me to be like that much of a threat. And like, I seem to recall some wars that we might have like, you know, been side by side on. So I'm pretty insulted on their behalf. It feels pretty messed up that like people who come from countries that like fought and bled and died alongside Americans have been told that suddenly they're like as distrustworthy as literally Libya, North Korea, and Cuba, right? Like this is just not how we do things in DC. And so I really hope that they're going to find their way out of this nonsense soon. So there's one thing I want to really emphasize here, which is that if you read Wikipedia, you can have some really, really fun nightmares, right? So this guy, does anyone know who he is? No, most people don't. Okay, so this is Swan Yushen, who's the co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, among other things. He served as a U.S. Army colonel during World War II. He studied under Kármán and some of the other founders of the rocketry community before that. He was responsible for helping to evaluate and recruit German rocket scientists to the U.S. after the end of World War II, including, and this is true, Werner von Braun, the head Nazi rocket scientist. He didn't have his green card at the time. He didn't get it until 1947. That's how much we trusted this guy. Well, by 1950, he was stripped of his security clearance because he had attended some Communist Party meetings that a bunch of other scientists for the Manhattan Project had also attended, including Robert Oppenheimer's brother, Frank. He tried to stay in the country, and Secretary of the Navy was vouching for him. He lost. He got detained for 5 years in hopes of that his knowledge would become useless due to the advance of technology in the period of time before we would ship him back to China. So he basically was on house arrest for like 5 years in Pasadena, during which time he, as just a little side project, invented the entirety of the modern field of engineering cybernetics and a good chunk of control theory. And then we deported him to China, where he came from, in a trade for a bunch of Korean War pilots who had crashed down in China. So he was pretty fed up. He was kind of hurt by that feeling. And as one might do, he decided then to be like, well, I guess I'm supposed to be a Chinese citizen now, and became the father of the Chinese ballistic missile and nuclear missile and satellite programs, and basically built them all. I'm really worried we're going to make this mistake again, and we're going to take all of the non-US citizen scientists that work at Anthropic and kick them out of the country, and they go to China or France or Germany or Russia or wherever, and be like, I guess that's the only place I can work. And then they end up building things that are rivals to the United States, and that essentially we lose the entire AI race because we were like trying to win the AI race. I think this is really, really possible and really scary. Like I have been like not been able to sleep very much because I've been worried about this. But there have been good news too. We've had the greatest crossover in the AI policy cinematic universe that you've ever seen. These three guys never agree on anything. Like these two guys are like big fans of like A16Z and the sort of like the White House and all of that. They just don't want any rules at all. And like Nathan Calvin is very much, he works for Encode, he's great, and he's very much more on the regulation side. And they're all three of them are like, this is stupid. Like I don't know anyone who's defending this. They're just like, this is confusing and odd and bad, and give us back our fable and mythos, please. So like little bit of a silver lining here. So what are my predictions for the next few years? So we're in the mid-game now. That's my one new prediction, right? We were in the early days of AI being something that people were starting to figure out and they hadn't really figured out. We now are in the place where they actually do. Power has woken up to AI, slowly, confusingly, using a very blunt hammer, but they are very awake now. You use Glomar as a way of saying you're not going to confirm or deny something as a meme. They built the Glomar Explorer as a way to lift a Soviet submarine off the floor of this ocean in order to spy on the Soviets. You are not the same. But also, AI companies are going to be basically becoming something that looks a lot more like an allied intelligence service or an allied Ministry of Defense than they look like a company right now, than they look like industry, derogatory. I think this is something where they realize that AI companies really have power now, and if they don't choke it off soon, it's going to be a really significant shift in global affairs. Also, something that I said before, and I still, less online, I still believe now, is that this whole problem of like what to do about the fact that the national security state treats U.S. citizens and green cards different than everyone else in terms of what we can do in terms of regulating them, spying them, all of them. This is going to be a big thing as these things become national security relevant, because we sure don't want to kick out all the people who work at like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google DeepMind who aren't U.S. citizens. But also we can't really spy on them as long as they're inside a U.S. company. That's against the rules. So what do we do? How do we de-risk this? There are ways to do it that we know how to do from the defense industry, but right now we're not doing them. Right now we're sending random emails at 5:21 p.m. And I am terrified, personally terrified, that we are going to have to do a huge amount of reorganizing of the defense and national security world to solve this problem. So I have some specific recommendations. The first is for OpenAI. I recommend that OpenAI stop having its people tweeting while they're sleep deprived and on tilt to the point where they can't remember which department of government the NSA is in. This is probably impossible for OpenAI's corporate culture, but I encourage them to try by perhaps taking away Sam Altman's Twitter password at night. You should stop also telling your people that U.S. national security law works the way that you think it does instead of the way it actually does, and maybe hire some lawyers that can explain it to you. Or, you know, I've heard that GPT 5.5 is actually pretty good on legal stuff now. I've actually asked it various questions about like, hey, like OpenAI said that like their deal with the Department of War allows them to do this and not that. Is that right? And ChatGPT is like, no, that's not how the law works. What are you talking about? So like maybe people should like check it a little more. I also think that like right now, OpenAI doesn't understand how it's going to be seen very soon by the national security state. I think a depiction of how it'll sound in a year or two, if you're briefing the President of the United States about OpenAI, is as follows. OpenAI is a historically unstable non-state actor, prone to coups and secession crises, now in possession of weapons of mass destruction. But, by the way, if you don't speak DC, allow me to translate one phrase for you here. That's DC for like ISIS or Al Qaeda, right, man? And occasionally the Red Cross. It's a long story. So Anthropic, let's also give them some feedback here, right? First off, they need to start nerding out more about what might happen in response to the national security state paying attention to them. They need to really start thinking through about what agencies might do to them and how they might get freaked out. They should think through about how the security obligations they have are going to constrain, not just security clearances, although that's true, but also citizenships and things like that, will constrain their ability to interface with the public on this stuff as it becomes of greater and greater import. And they should probably like take some of that like giant wave of philanthropic money we keep on talking about that they're going to have and all their DAFs and all their 501c3s and like pay for a bunch of lawyers to start writing a bunch of legal briefs and plans for what to do if this stuff gets really crazy. Anthropic should also recognize how they are, well, I said we're going to be seen, but I think probably now are already seen, which is an ideologically motivated non-state actor, which we are very, very embarrassed we didn't pay enough attention to previously, now in possession of weapons of mass destruction. Google should also do some things. Specifically, continue to stay quiet and pay their PR team whatever they want. Like, we forgot about them, right? Like, nobody's been paying any attention to them in this entire crisis, like, at all. Like, is it possible that, like, Google, like, are you know, vampires hypnotizing us? I think we should look into that. So that's my talk, right? We are in a weird place. We are in a very strange national security situation. I find this very funny. I don't think everyone does. However, I want to, like, give you some areas where you can ask me some questions, but I'm also open to whatever questions. But I stole this idea from Kelly Scholl, who's a friend of mine. He's on the job market. Hire him. First off, what should we do to fix this? Second of all, what should you be reading? Third, who is James Jesus Angleton, and why is he a cautionary tale for me specifically? Fourth, would you like to hear some strange and insane stories about national security law, including that time that they bugged MLK? And why is Spy Game the greatest spy movie of all time? Or you can ask me about like the Anthropic stuff. That's my talk. It's a warm room, and I'm open for questions. Yeah, you had your hand up first. Oh, you had your clap up first. Good job. You had a hand up. who are the people within the Department of Commerce who have made this decision? So according to the reporting we've now seen from the information in the Wall Street Journal, it looks like it was ultimately the president who made the call. But it seems like what happened was that the Department of Commerce was probably looking at it in part through sort of their Bureau of Industrial Security, BIS function, which does a lot of the export control stuff. But it seems like they were not the ones who teed up this decision. It seems, according to the journal's reporting, if it's accurate, which sometimes this stuff evolves and it turns out it's not fully accurate, it sounds like it was the White House Office of the National Cyber Director was some of the ones who found out about it. Apparently what happened, and everyone's very confused by this, is that like Amazon decided to come in and demo some jailbreak, is like at least what some people are claiming. And then like people got freaked out. But like Amazon's like super invested in like Anthropic, so this doesn't really make sense. So like my current best guess is that like the Amazon corporate affairs team was like, they don't take us seriously enough on AI. Show them something cool we can do on AI. And like a bunch of guys got asked like, what can you do that's cool on AI? And they're like, a jailbreak. Ooh, a jailbreak. What's a jailbreak? And then so like the corporate like government relations team like brings them in and they're like, look at what we can do. Look at all the things to do. We have these amazing servers that run all these AI models. And not only that, our team is amazing. They can design AI models. They can jailbreak AI models and they can blah, 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 blah. And then like someone in the room was like, wait, go back. And then freaked out, and then freaked out, and then freaked out, and then freaked out, and that's where we got to now. I think this was something very dumb snowballing is my best guess. And, you know, the authorities ultimately that were invoked were through Department of Commerce, but it sounds like it was more of a full White House decision. Other questions? Lisa. Okay, so the question for those who couldn't hear was basically, Dave, you said a lot about sort of like you should pay the AI lab should pay lawyers to think about this a lot more. To what extent is this something we can actually predict versus to what extent are we sort of in novel territory where the executive branch can do stuff very different from what they traditionally do? I think the answer is a bit of both, right? We're certainly off the edge of the map now, guys, right? Like I don't know of any time that I can think of that like randomly an entire mass like B2B and B2C service provided by a company got shut off by a government action like this when it was an American company, right? There's like some Huawei and Hikvision stuff that happened against China back in the day, but that was one, slower, two, not as big. Like maybe you could do the TikTok thing, but then again, that was like a very slow ramp up that required a congressional piece of legislation to get passed. So this is kind of we're off the edge of the map. There are some big authorities that the U.S. government set up during the Cold War that it's never used all the way to the edge of those authorities. The export control one is one. DPA is and Defense Production Act is another. There's a bunch of other authorities like that. I suspect that what's going to happen is we are going to play a lot of like legal speed chess for a while, where basically people are like, I say that the law says this. And then someone else is like, well, I paid another lawyer and they say something different. And then a third person is like, Grok, is this true? And, you know, I think that's basically where we're going to be in terms of managing this. It's going to be a back and forth. The one area where I'm very worried is that I feel like Congress is not sufficiently staffed to deal with this currently. I mean, the executive branch isn't either, but they're less understaffed relative to where they should be, I assert. I think Congress is not well staffed to deal with it, and I think we should try to encourage them to build up committee staff on this. You, sir, right there. Okay, so for those who couldn't hear, it was, if not for the first spat between the Department of War and Anthropic, would Anthropic been blamed for the bombing of the Iranian girls' school. For those who are not familiar, during the early days of the latest Iran conflict, there was a U.S. airstrike that targeted a school that they thought wasn't a school, and 146 schoolgirls died. I believe it was 146, roughly on that number. I don't really think anyone knows the extent to which Anthropic was actually involved. I've seen some reporting that they were. I've seen a lot more reporting that they weren't. It is certainly the case that there is a perception now of like, oh, Anthropic is involved in military stuff in a way that the others aren't, even though the others like at OpenAI and Google and others are actually like now building more of those integrations in terms of the classified military functions. And so I suspect that like you'll see less of that brand identification with Anthropic in particular. Certainly, if it was the case that Anthropic was responsible for that, that would obviously be a tremendous tragedy. Despite what you might think, like, there's like obviously some like messed up incentives for like me to like look at every negative incident where like some evidence could say it's maybe an AI thing and like be like, oh, it's an AI thing to try to like win political points. My best read of the information is that this was not something that was triggered by AI. Like we have had many unfortunate incidents over the years of like the U.S. having outdated information for airstrikes and hitting something that they thought was one thing and was another. Like during one of the 1990s stuff that we were doing with like, it was like, I forget if it was Bosnia or Kosovo, but one of them, we at one point airstruck the Chinese embassy in that country because we didn't know the Chinese embassy had moved there, and I think a couple Chinese nationals died, and it was like obviously an extraordinary embarrassment. It was like an unintentional act of war that we did not intend to cause, and like it had that. So like this does happen whether or not you have AI, and my best current read of the evidence is that's most likely the case. I do think that like between the combo of like Anthropic is kicked out. Just kidding. Actually, we're using Anthropic for thousands of missions a day was a bit of a story that people were tracking in DC though. Other questions? Yeah, you all the way in the back with the 2 fingers up. Or the question is like roughly the administration's posture is that they'll sort of use the full toolbox in order to advance their aims with regards to American national security. Why am I surprised they'd use something as a blunt tool like export control? My honest answer is that I'm not surprised that they do very aggressive mechanisms and very aggressive moves. I don't think this actually achieves their goals, right? Like one of the administration's goals is they want to, remember, spread the like U.S. AI tech stack everywhere and beat all the other AI tech stacks. I'm not actually sure I think AI tech stack is like a meaningful concept. It's kind of complicated. But like if it is, certainly going around to all the other countries we're trying to sell our stuff to and be like, hey, nice AI model you got there. What if you didn't have it anymore? You definitely want to buy it, right? Like that's like definitely really great to have an unreliable AI model. Like that just isn't something that they would want to do as a general policy measure. I would have thought. Like there's worlds where they would have done it if we were in a true emergency, to be sure. And I would have. I can easily think of emergencies where I would fully endorse them doing this. To be very clear, right? Like it is, and like I could easily imagine an article in the New York Times tomorrow of under 800 words that would fully change my mind on this and make me think it's a good idea. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think they just panicked. And someone had an options memo that had a bunch of options, and they picked the one that like shut the most things off the quickest. But again, like they didn't know that Anthropic didn't have the ability to only shut it off for non-US people. Like maybe like in another world, like okay, a bunch of US hackers then can do whatever this vulnerability in jailbreak is. Like frankly, probably the Amazon hackers that demoed this thing, at least some of them were probably US citizens, right? So like, what are we doing here? You know? Yeah, so for those who couldn't hear, Dave, you haven't mentioned the UK's AI Security Institute once yet. How do they fit in? And then, what do you think about their US counterpart in light of all this? So first off, UKAC is great. They're lovely. They're wonderful people. They do a lot of great work. I actually yesterday was entertaining the possibility because they had like put out this like blog post where they were like, we're really close to a universal jailbreak on Mythos. Like I was actually like my most likely scenario before we heard about the Amazon thing was that UKAC like finally cracked it the rest of the way and just like demoed it to their counterparts at NSA or whatever, right? And we're like, hey, look, we built this thing, and like then people freaked out was what I thought was most likely because they have a bunch of very skilled technical talent. I think probably if I were in their shoes, I'd be like, guys, can we get like an exception here? Like this just obviously doesn't make sense. Like obviously we're on your team. What's going on, right? I wouldn't be shocked if they're like politely giving us a day to get our house in order kind of thing, and on Monday they're going to send that email. But it doesn't make much sense. Okay, what about Casey, the U.S. version of this? It appears to have been that it's been cut a little bit out of the loop according to some news reports. I don't have any other confirmation than what I've seen in the news, but like it seems like they have been a little bit sidelined with like the Office of the National Cyber Director and NSA driving more of the conversation. I also think a point that I make a lot to people on Capitol Hill that really surprises them is I say to them that it's the only thing I know of where the UK is spending more money than the US is on a defense capability, other than like number of horses to protect the King of England. Like their budget is like 6 or 8 times the size of the U.S. budget, and like they employ a bunch of Americans. Incidentally, oh my God, they might be having all the Americans in a war room together, just using their own. Oh, that's an interesting idea actually, because they do have a bunch of Americans who work for them. Maybe they have the American. They're going to be like, well, we'll just let our Americans do all the testing going forwards. But they get funded a lot better. They do really good work. I think. America should really like staff up ours to be at least equivalent, like frankly quite larger. Like love the Brits, they're great. They've done incredible things as allies to America in so many ways, and not just in James Bond movies, but in real life too. It's great, but we should have a bigger AC than they do because we have more money. We should carry our weight. The question was, what should the U.S. government do to mitigate the risk of the models in the right way? First off, I think like not do this is the honest answer. Like sometimes just not doing anything is the right answer in national security, and kind of just let a bad thing go and like kind of very quietly kind of hope no one notices it. Like plausibly that was the right call here. Even if they decide to do something, I think invoking some other set of authorities have been better, right? Like export control certainly is one of the blunt levers you could pull. You also could have just said like, here's something you could have done that wouldn't have had the same like dynamics in some ways, right? The US government has declared the Defense Production Act means that we prioritize 100% of the tokens for Mythos and Fable for the next week. Why? We'll tell you later. And then at the end of that week, they're like, hey, we just had to borrow all the capacity for it until we got this jailbreak fixed. Now it's back, it's yours again, right? That's one thing you can just off the top of my head. In the longer term, I think what you should really do is you need to build up capability, whether it's KC or something else, that can really evaluate these models more and have a framework that isn't just, right now we have this executive order where it's voluntary, and everyone knows it isn't entirely voluntary, in the same way that the mafia tends to ask you to do favors. But, we need a real actual legal system a legal set of processes that have a real connection to the legal system behind them that are understandable, predictable, and legible, so that we don't have this problem where people don't know what to expect. This happened once, this can't happen again. If it happens again, it's going to become a precedent, and if it becomes a precedent, then a lot of people who are trying to sell AI models into other countries, even our allies, are going to have a much harder time. You. Yeah, so the question for those who can hear was, our friend here is not a US citizen or permanent resident. How worried should they be that they're not going to have access to the latest and greatest models from the US? I'm actually, I'm more worried about that than I was a couple days ago, to be sure, right? I think there's some threshold of good enough model, where it's you open up Claude Mythos 43 and you're win World War III from you, Claude Mythos, make no mistakes. That's at the point where obviously, I'm sorry, we're not going to export that one, right? But, short of that, I think the administration's incentives are really strongly in favor of releasing models as much as possible and letting people have access to them for the simple reason that they want the US tech stack to win. And it's very hard for me to believe that this is purely on a chip-based basis. I think they genuinely do want it to be software as well. If we're a week from now and they still haven't unwound it, I'd get more nervous if I were you. And quite frankly, if it gets a month from now, there's going to be a bunch of guys that leave OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and go take very nice job offers elsewhere, right, in other countries. And if it goes on for several months, then it's going to be the open weight models catch up, and we're really in trouble, right? Person in the green shirt there. Yeah, so the question for those who can hear is what are my predictions on policy going forwards? There's a lot of things floating around in various parts of the administration or the federal government. Sort of partial nationalization or sovereign wealth fund stuff, mandatory testing, child safety, which I don't think you said, but all sorts of stuff like that. What's going to happen? My prediction, so there's a bunch of things going on right now on Capitol Hill. One is that there's been an ongoing push for child safety stuff for a while. I think the Hill is very focused on that because at a first approximation, everyone on Capitol Hill is a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, right? So everyone is very focused on that just because they can imagine it happening to someone they know and love. And they should be, to be very clear. This is a good thing to be focused on. So I think you'll see some stuff happening on that kind of regardless of whatever else happens. What that exactly looks like, kind of unclear. Talk to someone like Adam Billen or Nathan Calvin at Encode who know a lot more than me. There's this thing called preemption, which is a whole fight about whether or not federal law gets to be the one that's governing AI stuff or whether it's state level stuff or whether it's both. They're making another run at it. I don't think it's likely to succeed. I think it's kind of they're making one last run before the midterms and 20% odds of it working. There's a clock that says it's 6 a.m. I don't know what that means. Does that mean I'm out of time? Okay, I'll wrap up at this point. There's a good reason to believe that the preemption thing is probably unlikely to succeed in its current form. It might if it's revised. I think there are worlds where I personally would be excited about preemption if it was very narrow and targeted. There's some stuff only the federal government should do around national security and international relations. And if you're targeting very narrowly on that, I'd be very excited. If it's very broad and covering a whole swath of ordinarily stuff that was covered by the states, I'd be very unhappy. We're more on the latter than the former right now. It could change. We'll see. And then I think the last thing I would say is it's 2:48. Great. And then the last thing I would say is just that I think we are going to see more and more national security stuff. It's likely to sort of fluctuate back and forth like this. But stay tuned because apparently Friday at 5 p.m. is when the administration likes to do things, which is, great if you live on the West Coast and not so great if you live on the East. But I'll be around for the rest of the day and all of tomorrow. So thanks very much. Bye.